double the honour. Yeah, I'll be reading the poetry of Matthew Arnold, 1820 to 1888, and it takes a fair bit to explain or to even figure out why I picked Matthew Arnold. I think I picked him because of Dover Beach. I reckon I'm lucky enough to have not had Dover Beach rammed down my throat at school, because anyone who has studied poetry at school probably hates that poem, and I'd like to give that poem some justice, because it's possibly one of the greatest poems of the 19th century. Now, Matthew Arnold was also just as much known for his poetry as his literary or his poetry criticisms. He wrote a lot of articles about poetry, and I think it might have even been Oscar Wilde, after he died in 1888, quipped that he must even hate God now. Which, a little bit, fairly ironic, because he was a very, very deeply religious man. And so, apart from Dover Beach, I'd like to read my favourite poem of his, The Buried Life. But before that, I'd like to read a couple of his that he dedicated to his French lover, Marguerite, because it's got some relevance to one of the lines in Dover Beach. But he was a very, very heartfelt poet, surprisingly so from a Victorian poet, and the poems he dedicated to Marguerite are incredibly heartfelt, and they're about lost love and isolation and loneliness after he broke up with her. And so the first one sometimes is called To Marguerite, but it's more commonly called Isolation to Marguerite. We were apart, yet day by day I bade my heart more constant be. I bade it keep the world away and grow a home for only thee. For feared, but thy love likewise grew, like mine each day, more tried, more true. The fault was grave. I might have known what far too soon, alas, I learned. The heart can bind itself alone, and faith may oft be unreturned. Self-swayed our feelings ebb and swell. Thou lovedst no more. Farewell, farewell, farewell. And thou lonely heart, which never yet, without remorse, even for a moment, didst depart from thy remote and sphered course, to haunt the place where passions reign, back to thy solitude again. Back, with the conscious thrill of shame which Luna felt that summer night flash through her pure immortal frame, when she forsook the starry height to hang over Endermine's sleep, upon the pine-grown Latmian steep. Yet she, chaste queen, had never proved how vain a thing is mortal love, wandering in heaven, far removed. But thou hast long had place to prove this truth, to prove and make thine own. Thou hast been, shalt be, art, alone, or, if not quite alone, yet they which touch thee are unmating things, ocean and clouds, and night and day, lorn autumns and triumphant springs, and life and others' joy and pain, and love, if love, of happier men. Of happier men, for they at least had dreamed two human hearts might blend in one, and were through faith released from isolation without end prolonged, nor knew although not less alone than thou, their loneliness. And this is to Marguerite, continued. Yes, in the sea of life enisled, with echoing straits between us thrown, dotting the shoreless watery wild, we mortal millions live alone. The islands feel the enclasping flow, and then their endless bounds they know. But when the moon their hollows lights, and they are swept by balms of spring, and in their glens on starry nights the nightingales divinely sing, and lovely notes from shore to shore across the sounds and channels pour. Oh, then a longing like despair is to their farthest cavern sent. For surely once they feel we were parts of a single continent. Now round us spreads the watery plain. Oh, might our marges meet again. Who ordered that their longing's fire should be, as soon as kindled, cooled? Who renders fain their deep desire? A God their severance ruled, and bade betwixt their shores to be the unplumbed salt, estranging sea. I find it rather curious that he writes about continental drift, and then he turns around and says God separated the continents. But that actually has relevance in Dover Beach, because well, he started writing Dover Beach during his honeymoon. He found another love. You'd think he'd have other things to do at the time.
Might have had incontinental drift.
Yeah. But he also wrote this at the time of just after Charles Darwin published The Origin of the Species, and being as religious as he was, he got very frightened by that book, because all around him there were people saying, maybe the Bible's bullshit after all. And so, what? And it gets studied so much, because he uses the metaphor of sight of things that are familiar and comforting to the eye, and then the sound of. Have you ever heard waves on a pebble beach? I've never heard it live. I've just heard it on film. It's a really weird sound, but it's got as the waves go back and forth across pebbles, and he uses that as a metaphor for things that he can't see and that he's very scared about, and that's what he says about religion in this poem. So here's Dover Beach. The sea's calm tonight. The tide is full. The moon lies fair upon the straits. On the French coast the light gleams and is gone. The cliffs of England stand glimmering and vast out in the tranquil bay. Come to the window. Sweet is the night air. Only from the long line of spray where the sea meets the moon-blanched land, listen, you hear the grating roar of pebbles which the waves draw back and fling at their return up the high strand, begin and cease and then again begin with tremulous cadence slow, and bring the eternal note of sadness in. Sophocles long ago heard it on the Aegean, and it brought into his mind the turbid ebb and flow of human misery. We find also in the sound of thought, hearing it by this distant northern sea. The sea of faith was once too at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. Ah, love, let us be true to one another, for the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy nor love nor light, nor certitude nor peace nor help for pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. Thank you. All right. I'll finish with this one, which it's a fairly long one, and it's called "The Buried Life." And I find it quite remarkable and wonderful that someone who grew up in his times could write about how difficult it is to live in those times and communicate what you really feel. It's called "The Buried Life." Light flows our war of mocking words, and yet behold, with tears my eyes are wet. I feel a nameless sadness over me roll. Yes, we know that we can jest. We know that we can smile. But there's a something in this breast to which thy light words can bring no rest. Thy gay smiles no anodyne. Give me thy hand and hush a while, and turn those limpid eyes on mine, and let me read their love, thy inmost soul. Alas, is even love too weak to unlock the heart and let it speak? Are even lovers powerless to reveal to one another what indeed they feel? I knew the mass of men concealed their thoughts, for fear that if revealed they would be by other men be met with blank indifference, or with blame reproved. I knew they lived and moved, tricked in disguises, alien to the rest of men, and alien to themselves. And yet the same heart beats in every human breast. But we, my love, doth us alike spell benumb our hearts, our voices? Must we too be dumb? Ah, well, for us, if even we, even for a moment, can get free our heart and have our lips unchained, for that which seals them hath been deep ordained. Fate, which foresaw how frivolous a baby man would be, by what distractions he would be possessed, how he would pour himself in every strife and well nigh change his own identity, that it might keep from his capricious play his genuine self, and force him to obey even in his own despite his being's law. Bade through the deep recesses of our breath the unregarded river of our life pursue with indiscernible flow its way, and that we should not see the buried stream and seem to be eddying at large in blind uncertainty, though driving on with it eternally. But often, in the world's most crowded streets, but often in the din of strife, there rises an unspeakable desire after the knowledge of our buried life, a thirst to spend our fire and restless force in tracking out our true original course, a longing to inquire into the mystery of this heart which beats so wild, so deep in us, to know whence our lives come and where they go. And many a man in his own breast then delves, but deep enough, alas, none ever minds. And we have been on many thousand lines, and we have shown on each spirit and power, but hardly have we for one little hour been on our own line. Have we been ourselves? Hardly had skill to utter one of all the nameless feelings that course through our breast. but they course on forever, unexpressed. And long we try in vain to speak and act our hidden self, and what we say and do is eloquent, is well, but 'tis not true. Then we will no more be racked with inward striving and demand of all the thousand nothings of the hour their stupefying power. Ah, yes, and they benumb us at our call. But still, from time to time, vague and forlorn, from the soul's subterranean death unborn as from an infinitely distant land, come airs and floating echoes and convey a melancholy into all our day. Only, but this is rare, when a beloved hand is laid in ours, when, jaded with the rush and glare of the interminable hours, our eyes can be in another eye's read clear, when our world-deafened ear is by the tones of a loved voice caressed. A bolt is shot back somewhere in our breast, and a lost pulse of feeling stirs again. The eye sinks inward, and the heart lies plain, and what we mean we say, and what we would we know. A man becomes aware of his life's flow, and hears its winding murmur, and he sees the meadows where it glides, the sun, the breeze. And there arrives a lull in the hot race, wherein he doth forever chase that flying and elusive shadow. Rest, an air of coolness plays upon his face, and an unwonted calm pervades his breast. And then he thinks he knows the hills where his life rose, and the sea where it goes. Matthew Arnold.